Hello to all. Today we are going to discuss about sexual reproduction in flowering plants. There are several different methods and processes involved in the sexual reproduction of plants. Many of the structures associated with the sexual reproduction in plants are valuable. So, sexual reproduction is the production of a new organisms from two parents by making use of their gametes or sex cells. So plants also have male and female sex organs. These sex organs in plants are carried within the flower and the seeds which are inside a fruit. Such plants are called as angiosperms or flowering plants, as they reproduce by sexual reproduction method. So most of the plants contain reproductive organs of both male and female in the flowers. The same flower has both male and female reproductive organs. Such flowers make male and female gametes and ensure that fertilization takes place so that new seeds are formed for the reproduction of plants. So let's discuss about some important points related to the sexual reproduction in plants. The reproductive parts are present in the flower, and the parts of the flower are sepals, petals, stamens and carpels. Sepals are green structure that protect the inner parts when the flower is in the bud stage. Petals are colorless and attracted the insect for pollination. Stamens are male reproductive parts and produce pollen grains that contains male gametes. Each stamen has two parts: filament, that is stalk, and anther, that is swollen top part, which has large number of pollen grains. The carpels is the female reproductive part and produces ovule that contain female gametes. It has three parts: stigma, which is the top sticky part and receives pollen grains during pollination; style, which is the middle long part; and ovary, which is the swollen part and contains ovules. Each ovule has an egg that is female gamete. The flowers may be bisexual, that is having both stamens and carpels. For example, mustard and hibiscus. The flower may be unisexual, that is having either stamens or carpels. For example, papaya and watermelon. So next we can discuss about pollination. So pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from an anther to the stigma of the flower. So the pollination is the process of transfer of pollen grains from an anther to the stigma of the flower. So there are two types of pollination: self-pollination and cross-pollination. So self-pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the same flower or another flower of the same plant. So self-pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the same flower or another flower of the same plant. And cross-pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the another flower or another flower of the different plants of the same species. It generally takes place with the help of some agents like insects, birds, winds and water. So cross-pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of another flower or another flower of the different plants of the same species. It generally takes place with the help of some agents like insects, birds, wind and water. Fertilization. Fertilization is the process of fusion of male and female gamete to form a zygote during sexual reproduction. Pollination is followed by the fertilization in plants, and the events are: pollen grains land on the stigma of the ovary, pollen tubes grow out of the pollen grains, travel through the style and reach the ovary through micropyle. Pollen tubes has two male germ cells. Each ovule has two polar nuclei and a female germ cells, that is egg. Pollen tube releases two male germ cells inside the ovule. One of them fuses with a female germ cell and forms a zygote, which grows into the baby plant, that is embryo. The fusion is known as syngamy. The other male germ cells fuses with the two polar nuclei. The process is known as triple fusion. So in flowering plants, two fusions takes place during fertilization. It is called as double fertilization. So pollen tube releases two male germ cells inside the ovule. One of them fuses with the female germ cells and forms a zygote, which grows into a baby plant, that is embryo. The fusion is known as syngamy. The other male germ fuses with two polar nuclei. The process is known as triple fusion. So in flowering plants, two fusions takes place during fertilization. That is known as double fertilization. After fertilization, some changes takes place in the flower. The zygote divides several times and forms an embryo inside the ovule. And the ovule develops a tough coat and changes into the seeds. And the ovary grows rapidly and ripens to form a fruit. Petals, sepals, stamen, style and stigma shrivel and fall off. The advantages of seed is that it protects the future plants, that is embryo. And seed has two parts, cotyledons and embryo cotyledons, store food for the future plant. And embryo has two parts, plumule and radicle. Plumes develops into shoot and radicle develops into root. The process of development of seedling from the embryo under appropriate condition is known as germination. So embryo has two parts, that is plumule and radicle. Plumule develops into shoot and radicle develops into root.